Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
Welcome to a special edition of Inside Politics as we look back 50 years ago on the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Hello everyone, I'm News Channel 5's political analyst Pat Nolan. Our guests today are Reavis Mitchell, a historian from Fisk University, and Dwight Lewis, a retired editor and longtime reporter with the TENNESSEAN. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation. For our generation, the King murder is one of those events that brings back very vivid and distinct memories. I think all of us know exactly where we were when we learned about this tragic event. Let's briefly let each of you tell your story about how you learned about this, Dwight.
I was a student at Tennessee State University, my third year at Tennessee State, and I was staying at the Kennedy Apartments down on Jefferson Street. I was walking back home, and somehow word, I don't remember exactly how, but got word that Dr. King had been assassinated. And that's where I was, it's one of those nights that you will never forget.
Dr. Mitchell?
I was leaving class.
You were at Fisk?
Never will forget. I was at Fisk. It was my third year. I had been in the student senate at Fisk. And when I heard Dr. King had been assassinated on the TV, I didn't really rush home. My father operated Val Dot Liquor Store on 12th and Jefferson. And I began to head towards the store because I knew that it was going to be difficult with Dr. King being assassinated. I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought it would be riots, but I felt a sense of great uncertainty, great insecurity.
I was a junior at Father Ryan High School. I was practicing with a group to sing at a folk mass wedding that weekend. It was one of the new things. Folk mass weddings were a big deal at that point. We knew that perhaps it was going to be a difficult time going forward. We ended the practice. I went back to school the next day. By that point, Governor Ellington and Mayor Briley had called out the National Guard, 4,000 of them. They were all bivouacked behind the school at Father Ryan. We had half-tracks and jeeps and tanks and everything else going up and down that whole day. I had a chemistry teacher who did not quite know what to do. She said, I'd never been in occupied territory before, and she didn't quite even know how to speak. How did you feel? Did you immediately, when the guard showed up, was that sort of disconcerting to you?
Well, at first, the guard didn't show up. Coming up Jefferson Street, my grandfather's restaurant was on 10th and my father's store was on 12th. Commissioned, we call them almost free grabbers, white men with pump-action shotguns came in, and I reached the liquor store by the time they got to, you got to close this place up. You got to close this place up. And so I didn't appreciate, I thought, because this is the 60s and we've been sensitized. And I didn't like having white men with shotguns walking down Jefferson Street. So I stayed there with my dad, closed it up, and we went home. But the family gathered around the TV. People I remember didn't even call each other. Now the next day, as you mentioned, I started to school, and there were tanks bivouacked at 18th and Jefferson. And we walked into class, history class, and Professor Currier announced the topic for the day is Andrew Jackson. And we said, nope. The topic for the day is why those tanks out there on 18th and Jefferson. That's the topic.
But, you know, Pat, for those newcomers to Nashville who weren't here in 1968, or for those too young to remember, or too young who weren't born yet, the previous year, in April 1967,
that's right,
there had been a disturbance here, and police officers, and I forget whether the guard had been called out, but it happened started on a late Saturday night, so this was the second time.
Is that why you think Mayor Briley brought the guard in so quickly, because there had been that before and they wanted to be sure they got on top of it from the very beginning?
You know, I can't say for sure, but like I said, 1967, April 1967, and the disturbance started up near Fisk University.
Well, if you look what had happened in Greensboro in 1960, that began to be, well, you had the media, and everybody could, evening news. And we knew what was happening in other places. So that was sort of this law and order mentality. You mentioned that police group, they were a rather swagger group. It was a guy named Newman, who was a motorcycle officer. And it was Newman's Raiders from the police department. And they would come out, they were motorcycle, and they'd ride up and down Jefferson Street, you know, doing traffic enforcement, but there was a feeling of intimidation.
In the African-American community, was there a feeling when the guard showed up and when Mayor Briley imposed a dusk to dawn curfew for that week that this was not necessarily to keep you safe, it was to keep the African-American community in its place?
At 20 years old then, I'm 70 now, so you look back 50 years. All I remember, you know, we watched TV that night of the assassination, April 4th. But the next day, And I said, I was staying at the Kennedy Apartments, which is right next to the Jefferson Street Missionary Baptist Church. We had, curfew was imposed. I think you had to be in at 6 o'clock. At Tennessee State, you had to get off campus to go to your apartment. If you lived off campus, you had to show your driver's license or a letter or a bill or something or another. But that evening, someone shot a firecracker, and the police, they were going to enforce the curfew. But around our apartment, apparently someone shot a firecracker, and they gave the police a chance to go through every apartment in that complex. And I remember
they searched the dorms at Tennessee A&I at that time too.
But wait a minute, it didn't happen until a little later that night. But I remember the police coming in our apartment, and everybody up against the wall. Put your hands up against the wall. And if you didn't get up to the wall fast enough, I had one roommate, Alfred Latson. They just threw him into the wall. And sure, a young person, 20 years old, scared to daylight. I had never seen anything like it before.
Six blocks down the street at 18th, that was supposedly a riot. The next day, the banner carried 200 Fisk students riding the streets. There weren't 200 Fisk students out there because of the curfews. You're in trouble. But it was a time. My cousin Candace was quite fair. She had her window smashed because someone thought there was a white girl on Jefferson. It was that type of but people began to come from all over Nashville, from down off of Charlotte. They began to come to 18th. That's where everything begins to organize. So down where you were, it's difficult to get from the Kennedy Apartments up to 18th.
And one of the things that you talked about searching the dormitories at Tennessee State. That night, in our apartment, we had a front window, but you couldn't see out the back, and we were like number 2 or 3. And later that night, you just hear this clanking sound. It's like they're coming to kill us. They're coming to kill us. We couldn't see outside. Couldn't go outside because there was a curfew. And what happened that night is that somebody set the ROTC building on Tennessee State University's campus on fire. And the tanks and police and National Guard went up there, and we didn't find out until the next day that they had searched the dorms and what have you.
Dwight Lewis, former retired editor and reporter, long time at the Tennessean, along with Dr. Reavis Mitchell from Fisk University, history professor there. They're our guests on Inside Politics. We're looking back 50 years later at the Martin Luther King assassination, the impact on Nashville, and now looking forward, the impact on the rest of the state and the nation. We'll be back to continue Inside Politics after this break.